Dunstan didn't think he had eaten quite this good in a long time. At the group home, they would be eating cold cereal or toast with peanut butter as they all tried to get out the door before the bus left. It was hard to get that many kids out the door on time, and Dunstan never could figure out how Mary made it happen. If there had been a big donation, and it was a weekend, you might get powdered eggs, or pancakes, or maybe Lego My Eggos with that fake butter that never seemed to spoil. As he sat there with Masha and Dex, munching happily like a pig at the trough, he realized what had been missing from his life all along. The sense of fullness, something he had never known, was like a warm blanket over his belly. And why shouldn't it be? He certainly had enough to get him there, and that was the real miracle here. When they had hit the line this morning, the people there had started putting food on their tray, and damn near didn't stop. There was grits, eggs, scrambled and over easy, toast with jam, bacon, sausage, pancakes, waffles, an omelet bar, donuts, something called crepes that were stuffed with some kind of chocolate spread that turned out to be better than breathing, and juice, coffee, water, tea, soda, whatever else you might want to drink. Dunstan had been putting it away like people might come and try to take it from him, and Dex was watching him with something like awe. "Dun, take it easy, bud. You're gonna hurt yourself." Dunstan couldn't help but notice that he'd loaded up too. Grits, eggs, 2 omelets, coffee, and the cup most people had juice in, but he supposed that Dex was making up for lost time. Dunstan had been despairing cold cereal and milk, but at least it was food. While he was rolling his eyes at Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch, Dex was out there searching for his daily bread, and probably going hungry as often as not. "Sorry," he said, wiping his mouth. We never got food like this at the group home." Masha looked up from her own food, eating eggs and bacon with a couple of little flapjacks slowly turning to mush under the syrup she'd put on them. "You guys didn't eat breakfast where you lived? But Mommy says it's the most important meal of the day." "We did," Dunstan assured her. "It was just never this nice." "I know what you mean," Dex said. "Last time I had scrambled eggs was when Wizard fixed up a hot plate he found in the trash and tried to cook eggs for breakfast. Turned out he had filched them from a bird nest, and they tasted terrible. They stuck to the hot plate, and eventually it just shorted out, and we ran off as it set on fire." Dex laughed, but the others were just looking at him oddly. He finally stopped, looking a little sheepish. I guess you'd have to be there." They ate a little more, the kids around them talking in low voices about the armbands that had been in their lockers this morning. "So, what do you think they mean?" Dunstan said, holding up a wrist with a blue armband on it. Dex looked at his. It was red, but it was hard to miss that Masha had a green band. He'd seen one kid with a black band, one kid with a white band, and a couple of kids with yellow bands, but most of the bands were either blue, green, or red. "My working theory is that the blue means gifted, while the green means smarty pants, and red is for the muscle that get to carry us around." Masha giggled, and Dex just rolled his eyes at him, smiling despite himself. Maybe the red bands are the guys who get to kick the guys with the blue bands first, and if there's anything left of them, then the blue band guys get to have a go." "Hey, what about me?" Masha asked, scratching her head. "You get to sit closest to the action since you're short," he said, ruffling her hair. They didn't seem to be the only ones talking about the armbands this morning, and everyone seemed to have a theory. Dunstan was trying not to listen, but it was hard with all the voices rising and falling around him. A couple of kids thought the red bands might be soldiers and the green bands might be doctors, and the blue bands were scientists. Others thought that it might be a power thing. Red and black was the most powerful, with the other colors being less powerful, white being the least. The girl, wearing the only white band, looked less than pleased with this, and when she smashed a chunk out of the table, the others stopped saying it quite so loudly. Some people thought the red bands might be for offensive users, while the green and the blue were for more subtle powers. Doesn't really do any good to speculate about it, Dunstan thought, even though he had kind of started it. They'll have to tell us eventually. He had barely started on his omelet when the man from yesterday, the one Masha called Cutter, took the stage again. He clapped his broad, scarred hands together, and the room was soon quiet, except for the sounds of those meaty hands coming together. Some of the kids joined in, clearly thinking it was some kind of game, but none of their group did. Masha had told them what she suspected about the man, and they all believed it. The guy was twice as big as any of the other minders, and he looked like he ripped phone books in half in his spare time, just for fun. "Is everyone enjoying their breakfast?" he asked, and you could tell who the less fortunate kids were, because they lifted their voices high. "Good, good. Well, it's almost time for class. When the clock behind me chimes, it will be 0800, and time for class to begin. You will notice that each of you has an armband. That's because all of you have unique abilities, but it's important that they are nurtured in just the right environment. So when it's time for class, follow the lighted path that matches your armband so you get to the right class. If you go to the wrong class, don't worry, you'll be taken to the right one. Today's a grace day, but in the future, if you make a habit of going to the wrong class, you will get a demerit, and you don't want those. So finish up and make your way to your first class." Dunstan, Dex, and Masha looked at each other, sharing the same thoughts. They each had different armbands, so they wouldn't be in the same class. Masha looked a little weepy at this, but Dex patted her arm and smiled. "No tears, little sis. We'll see each other later. Shoot, there's only 22 of us. It's not like we can lose each other." Masha smiled a little wetly, swallowing her tears. "Right, that's right. I'll see you guys after class." Dunstan smiled too, but he'd noticed something that Dex hadn't yet, something that troubled him. Little Miss Blonde Bully from the night before also had a green armband, which meant she would have access to Masha without them there to protect her. Dunstan took another bite, but his appetite was retreating rapidly. He hadn't taken more than a couple of bites before the clock chimed 8, and everyone dumped their trays before heading to class. The three of them stopped, looking at each other before waving and heading down the hallway to their respective classes. Dunstan hoped the little girl would be able to hold her own. He hoped he and Dex would too, for that matter, and it wasn't a great thought on your first day of school. "Oh well," he breathed, as he fell in with the group of blue bands. "I guess we'll find out." "Welcome, blue bands, to your first lesson. I'm Mrs. Lloyd, and I will be your minder." Rebecca looked around the room and saw 7 others in the class. Their group had been the largest by far, and she'd been surprised when Gerald had come up with a blue band as well. She hadn't really asked what his power was, but she supposed he was like her. She guessed that most of them were like her, seers and future tellers and the like. It was scary, but it was good to know that she wasn't alone in her weirdness. "As some of you may have figured out," said the woman in the flowing dress with the long honey wheat hair, "blue bands designate you as seers. You use your powers to see things, whether it be the future or the past. Let's go around the room and share our abilities with each other." There were no desks here, no books or computers, just a circle of chairs that kept everyone within view. Rebecca could see 4 boys and 3 other girls, one of them a giant with platinum hair that looked like a hardback book sitting amongst paperbacks. She had to be an adult. She looked a little like an adult, but when she offered to go first, Rebecca was amazed that a voice that soft came from something so large. Her voice was twinged with something slightly Germanic, and it seemed like she might be Northern European, German, or Icelandic, or somewhere like that. "I guess I will. I'm Emily, and I see things that come true. The problem is that no one believes me when I tell them. My mother said she had it too. All the women in our family do. And she says it's like Cassandra from the Greek stories. Last August, I told my friend Eula that she would break her arm while sledding. She didn't believe me, but when she did, she said I was strange and would not be my friend anymore. Wonderful, the woman said, and when Emily looked at her strangely, she waved a hand at her. Not about your friend, dear. That's terrible, but it's good that you understand your powers. Who would like to go next? A boy named Jax went next, talking about visions he saw when he dreamed, but when the minder's attention had turned away from the other side of the room, Rebecca leaned down and whispered to Gerald. He had insisted on sitting next to her, because of course he had, and she was now a little glad of it. Should we lie? She half-mouthed at him, keeping her voice low, but Gerald shook his head. They know what we can do already. No sense lying, they'll know. Yeah, but since you two would like to talk, the minder said, her cheery voice becoming strained, why don't you two go next? Rebecca balked, but Gerald stood up as if he'd only been waiting for the opportunity. I'm Gerald. I'm 10, and I see strings. I see the connection between people, where they lead, and how they will affect me. Blue means friends, orange means danger, green is positive interactions, while red means certain death. They don't really tell people's future, I guess, and mostly help me navigate without being hurt. Interesting, the woman said, sounding mystified. And do you see a string attached to me? Yes, Gerald said. It's green. Then he took his seat again. The woman seemed a little underwhelmed, but turned to Rebecca, raising an eyebrow. And you, young lady? Rebecca rose slowly, trying to bury the fear that writhed inside her. She hated public speaking, had always hated it, but she wanted to make a good first impression. She hoped she wouldn't stutter too bad. Better a stutterer than a coward, though, she supposed. I'm Rebecca, and I see the future sometimes. I guess I have visions, too, like Emily, but I'd never told anyone about them, so I don't know if they believed me or not. I can't really control them, though. They just kind of happen. She felt like she should say more, but she sat down instead, not sure what she would have added. Gerald gave her a thumbs up as the minder turned to another boy and invited him to speak. I'm Dunstan. I see things by holding things. I pick up memories, I guess, but I've never asked anyone if they're true or not. I just kind of assumed. The minder nodded. An automatic writer. I can assure you there will be plenty of opportunities to test your visions here, Dunstan. Far from looking relieved, Dunstan nodded morosely. Dang, I was kind of hoping it was all in my head. Some of the kids laughed, but the minder moved on like she hadn't heard. A girl named Anja started talking about seeing the future in people's palms, but Rebecca wasn't paying attention to her. She was looking at Gerald, who was looking at the boy the minder had called an automatic writer. Gerald's eyes were big, intent, and though he kept looking away before the boy could notice him, she knew he was seeing something. It was the same look he gave her sometimes, so she hoped it was good. I'm Mark, the last boy said. I can tell who passes by a place by touching footprints or fingerprints. I figured it out when my daddy and I were hunting a few years ago, and he usually helps me track things. Usually just works on animals, but recently I discovered I could see a person's face if I touched something their fingerprints were on. Very interesting, the minder said, beaming at them as she looked around the room. Now that we know what we can do, let's begin some exercises to strengthen your abilities. Mark, Dunstan, and Anja, why don't you all go with my friend there? She said, indicating a man in a red smock they hadn't noticed until now. It was no wonder they hadn't seen him, and seeing him again drew the breath into Rebecca harshly. He had been right there the whole time, that tiny little traitor. Dr. Hammarskjöld smiled at the children. but when he looked at Rebecca, she saw a sad look cross his face. Good. He should be sad, she thought bitterly. He had to be the reason she was here, and when she started to get up, Gerald took her hand. She looked at him, and he shook his head knowingly, telling her to let it go with his eyes. Dr. Hammarskjöld had taken the 3 kids into another part of the room before she turned back, and she imagined he was probably glad to be away from her. If the minder had noticed her trying to rise, she didn't comment on it. The rest of you, I want you to close your eyes and try to focus your power on your gifts. Focus your thoughts, and let's see what we can do. Dex gritted his teeth as he focused his thoughts on the dummy in front of him. He had never really done this on something without a mind, and certainly never in front of an audience. Most of the time, he tried to pretend he didn't have powers, but as he felt them building, like a fist drawing back, he released them and hit the dummy square. It wobbled, spinning drunkenly before coming back to rest on its base. A hand came down on his shoulder, and he looked up into the grinning face of the man Masha had called Cutter. From this close, he had no doubt that the guy could be mean, and he didn't doubt it when Masha said that he would have liked to slap her. The guy had scars on his knuckles, and he looked more like a longshoreman than a teacher. Good shot, kid. It's harder to hit a non-thinking being, I'm guessing. That's okay. We'll get you there. Next. Dick stepped up next, bumping Dex as he walked by and then sneering when Dex lifted an eyebrow at him. He wasn't as big as Dex, but he was sturdier to be sure. Dick looked like he'd gotten 3 squares a day before coming here, and he looked like the only running he had done was recreational. He'd said proudly that he was captain of his football team, and that he'd been looking forward to high school next year, so he could see how he stacked up against the bigger kids. Dex imagined he stacked up quite well, but sports probably weren't the only metric he meant to use. Dick got up to the line, taking a stance like a martial artist preparing to thrust his closed palm at the dummy. Something like a gust of wind came out to slam into it, a gust of wind as big as a canoe, and the dummy fell over. It didn't wobble, it didn't shimmy, it fell straight back, and Dick stood up with a pump of his arm and a loud whoop. The bald man gave him a similar pat on the back, telling him to hop back in line. On the way, he shoulder-checked a kid who couldn't have been more than 12. The kid fell, going down hard on his ass, and he made an indignant sound at Dick as the bigger boy walked past. "Got a problem?" Dick said, squaring up as he loomed over the kid. The smaller boy, Dex thought his name was Ryan, turned away as he took his spot on the line. There were 5 red bands, and all of them had some kind of physical ability. Dick was one of the bigger bugs, but the kids before Dex had barely managed to move the dummy. They all pushed out with some kind of psychic energy, as far as he could tell, and it appeared he wasn't as bad at this as he thought. His head hurt a little, but that was pretty normal. As Ryan stepped up, he looked at Cutter and told him this probably wasn't going to work. He smiled, but Dex thought he could hear the man's teeth creak. "Any particular reason why not?" "It just doesn't work that way. I've never tried attacking anything without a brain. My power doesn't really—" "Just give it a try," Cutter said. "We're just here to see what you can do." Ryan sighed and turned back to the dummy. He scrunched his face up, drawing laughter from Dick, Wade, and a girl named Cece who looked a little like a troll. Dex didn't join them. For all her size and bluster, Cece had barely managed to shake the dummy, and Wade had nearly passed out from the effort of bumping it with his power. He didn't really see as any of them had a lot of room to make fun, and he crossed his arms as he watched the kid work. A vein ticked in Ryan's forehead, and he gritted his teeth like he was trying to take a dump. The other kids laughed all the harder, and that didn't seem to be helping matters much for Ryan, as he finally dropped his hands and looked at the handler. He shrugged, shaking his head and looking unamused. I told you, I've never attacked anything without a brain. Cutter shrugged. Well, we'll work on that, he said, turning to face them as Ryan returned to the line. Physical powers are difficult. No one is claiming otherwise. Unlike some of the more mental stuff, your body has to be prepared to harness that kind of power. You'll spend a lot of time in the gym here, a lot of time building stamina, and that will help you expand what you can do with your powers. This class will be a lot more demanding than the classes your peers will take, but it will all be worth it in the end. Just remember that. You listening, Ryan? Dick asked, and the others laughed again as the smaller kid's face got redder. If Cutter minded, he gave no indication. Let's get to work then, shall we? They broke for lunch around noon, and all three of them were a little less enthusiastic when they met up in the cafeteria. Dex was sweaty and sore. Class with Cutter was more like gym than anything. They had run, they'd done exercises, and they had used the machines in the workout room, and in between, they'd used their powers. Dick seemed capable of using his on command, and Dex wondered how often he'd used it before he'd been picked up. Ryan still couldn't do much more than grunt, but he wasn't alone. Wayne could use his power a little and make little pushes once or twice a day, but that was it. Cece and Dex could use their powers up to 3 times a day, but the third time had given Dex a nosebleed, and he'd had to sit down for a minute and drink some water. He figured this would earn him some catcalls from Dick and his little gang, but it hadn't. Dick apparently had realized that he couldn't push Dex around like he could Ryan, and he had begun focusing on the smaller boy more and more. Ryan was trying, but Dick was hounding him every chance he got. Dex told his friends about it, and as he watched Ryan eating with some kids his age, Dick tossed a spoon at him and laughed. That kid's got an ass whooping down the road, he said, and Dunstan agreed. I don't know if I can go back to class this afternoon, Dunstan said. I've held so many things today that I think I might have a stroke if this spoon wasn't so clean. Ooh, holding stuff, Dex said, but he said it good-naturedly. Dunstan wished it had been just holding stuff. Dr. Hammarskjöld was a nice enough guy, but he had the weirdest collection of things. Dunstan had seen 2 happy couples from different pieces of jewelry, a murder-suicide that he wished he hadn't, and a man get cut in half by a semi-truck from just a pair of sneakers. The last one had been a loud argument between someone's parents from a kid's Tonka truck, and that one had really messed him up. The way the kid just sat there, focusing on the big yellow dump truck, you could tell this wasn't the first fight he'd witnessed. His appetite from this morning was nearly gone, and he was mostly just picking at his food apathetically. At least you don't have Chandra in your head all the time, Masha said glumly. All through lessons this morning, boring things that really didn't hold her attention, Chandra, the blonde bully from the dorm, had done nothing but torment Masha. She had said some pretty cruel things, and Masha had to wipe tears away more than once throughout the lessons. You tell a teacher? Dex said, guessing it probably wouldn't do any good. No, if I tattle she wins. I'll be okay, it's just words. Dex nodded as he looked at his food, wondering how long it would be just words. You know, a girl could get a little jealous of all the attention you've been giving out. Gerald didn't bother to look at her. His eyes were still glued to the little group eating not too far away. Why don't you go introduce yourself? Rebecca said, sighing deeply. Did your parents not teach you how to make friends? Dad tried to teach me how to cook meth once, but I'm not sure that's the chemistry that you're talking about here. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at that, but decided to change the subject. What do you see that's so interesting anyway? Is it the strings? Yeah, Gerald said, turning away as Dunstan glanced in his direction, clearly feeling his eyes on him. You didn't tell me you could do stuff like that. You didn't ask, Gerald said, and Rebecca almost threw her spoon at him. What string do you see around me? She asked, more to stop him from staring and causing trouble. Blue, he said, and she believed him, unlike when he had told the minder that hers was green. And what color do you see when you look at those three? When he turned back to answer, his attention was so intense that she wished she hadn't asked. The clock sounded the end of lunch, but it didn't stop her from hearing his answer. All of them, threaded into a single strand and pulsating like neon tubing. Masha tried not to look bored, but the work was pretty easy. There were 6 of them in class, which was good because it meant the work groups were even. The mean girl was in class, though, so that was bad. Mrs. Cashmere, their minder, was nice, so that was good, and she seemed to like Masha, which was also good. She could hear the mean girl in her thoughts as her partner, a dark-haired girl named Heather, thought about shapes while Masha picked them out of her head. Of the 6 people in class, 5 were girls. Masha, Jenny, and Brittany, her friends called her Brit, were telepaths. The mean girl, Chandra, and Heather were what the minder called implanters, people who could implant things in people's heads. Daniel, the only boy in class, was something called a director. He could direct people's thoughts on a particular path and lead them to ideas or concepts they might be trying to come to. This sounded a lot like implanting, but it was supposed to be more subtle. Implanters can put the idea in someone's mind, but a strong mind can still resist it. Directors can work more subtle ideas into a mind and make them come to the conclusion that they might be less likely to come to on their own, something that's hard for an implanter. That was what Miss Cashmere had said when Masha had said they sounded the same, and Chandra had stuck her tongue out at Masha when the minder had turned around. Now they were split up, a telepath and an implanter, or a director in Brit's case, and they were playing a training game. The implanter would draw a card from the deck and look at the symbol on it. Then the telepath would try to pick it out of their head, while they sent them a different symbol. Heather was trying her best, but Masha was pretty good at picking out the truth from the lies. She had gotten 7 out of 10 so far, and it would have been 10 out of 10, except Masha kept trying to trip her up. It appeared she wasn't content to stump Jenny, who wasn't very good at being a telepath, but to send wrong answers to Masha to trip her up. "Wow," said Heather, "you're really good, but I'm gonna stump you." She drew another card, and Masha tried to listen for the words and look for the hidden pictures. As she searched for the truth, the voice buzzed in the back of her head. "Star, circle, moon, slip up, you little bitch." "Square," Masha said, and Heather smiled as she nodded. "Moon, horseshoe, star, you dumb little..." "Circle," Masha said, and Heather nodded again. Chandra's meddling didn't help much, and after 30 cards, Masha still had the best score out of the group. "You're very talented, Masha. I wouldn't be surprised if you were one of the stronger telepaths of the group." Masha had been afraid that this might raise some jealousy, but the other students were surprisingly supportive. All of them except Chandra, who just looked even angrier than she had before. When they left class at the end of session, Masha was happy to see that she wasn't alone. Heather and Jenny had decided to walk with her, and Chandra hovered near the back, an angry cloud of loud emotions. At 4 o'clock, the bell rang, and they were released for more free time. Masha, Dex, and Dunstan fell in together, and Masha was all agush about classes. She had performed better than Chandra, the blonde bully, and Dunstan said that he had done some interesting things too in the afternoon classes. Dex was surprisingly quiet, but he was also pretty tired. Dex wasn't paying attention to the others as they chatted, though. Dex was watching Ryan, scenting danger. All through the afternoon workout, Dick had been laying into Ryan pretty hard. Cutter did not seem to be there to keep them from picking at each other. He almost seemed to enjoy it. Dex had tried to talk to Ryan and maybe make it harder for people to start shit with him, but Ryan seemed distrustful of him and usually kept his distance or spoke in monosyllables. When Dick had tripped him on the running track, making some excuse about not seeing him there, Dex had thought it would reach a head right then and there, but it hadn't. Now he could see Dick and his new gang hovering around the poor kid like flies on crap, and when Dick shoved him hard enough to make him hit the nearby wall, Dex was in motion. "Dex?" Dunstan said, moving to keep up, but Dex didn't have time to explain. "Leave me alone, Dick!" Ryan shouted, rounding on him with his fists balled up. Oh, you gonna fight me, Shrimp? Take your shot. I'll beat you to a last chance, Ryan growled, putting his hands on his temples. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you keep this up. That brought a chorus of laughs from the three red bands, and Dick crossed his arms over his chest as he grinned at the boy. He was sneering, but he hadn't seemed to notice the blood dribbling from his nose yet. Tell you what, Squirt, take your best shot. We all saw how pathetic you were out there. You think any of us are... But he stopped when Dex got between them. Dex felt a tingle on the back of his head, but it stopped pretty quick. Ryan wasn't opposed to defending himself, but it appeared he didn't want to hurt people who had done nothing to him. That's enough, Dick. It's not funny. Never was. Leave this kid alone. Dick grinned, but Dex saw the murder in his eyes as he gave Dex his full attention. Or what? Dex pulled himself up to his full imposing size, and he saw the bigger boy back down a little. Dex wasn't a bully, but he was a big guy. He wasn't as filled out as Dick, but he was still big, and big meant a lot to guys like Dick. It gave him pause, if nothing else, and that was all Dex needed. Dex didn't answer. He didn't have to, and Dick just scoffed and walked off with his cronies eventually, the situation over. The crowd that had been gathering dispersed, no longer smelling blood, and Dex sighed as everything returned to, well, something like normal. I didn't need you to, Ryan started, but Dex rounded on him and stole his words. Yeah, I think you did. I don't know what you've got there, but it's a gun, like mine. You need to figure out how to use it before you get somebody hurt. I know how to use my power, Ryan shot back, looking away as if Dex had guessed what he'd been about to do. I don't really know the rules around here, but I can't imagine they're okay with kids killing each other. You got something Dick doesn't. Don't let him trick you into killing both of you with it. He started back towards his friends, but stopped midway between them and Ryan. If he bothers you, come sit with us. My friends and I don't like bullies either, and there's safety in numbers. I don't need protecting, Ryan said to his back. Nah, Dex said, but everybody needs a friend. Gerald watched the group move off, still seeing that banded line that connected all of them to him. He'd seen the string change colors, but he'd never seen them like this. This was different, and he didn't know what to make of it. Looks like the fight's over, Rebecca said, tugging his arm and leading him towards the library. She'd found a collection of Twilight books, her favorite series, and she wanted to get them before any of the other girls got there and checked them out first. Gerald went with, not really caring for books at the moment. There was a bigger mystery afoot, and he was intent on solving it, since his life seemed to hang in the balance. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in hopefully a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.